At 76, King Charles made a quiet but explosive confession during a private conversation that was later leaked by an aide to the British press. The words were simple but seismic. "She was the love of my life." Most assumed he meant Camilla, the woman he married after decades of complicated romance. But sources close to the monarch revealed something else entirely. His statement was about Princess Diana. After years of silence, a ghost from the past had returned to dominate the present. Royal watchers were stunned, not just by the name, but by the timing. Why now? With his health reportedly fragile and his reign still newly begun after Queen Elizabeth's passing, Charles seems to be doing more reflecting than ruling. This confession wasn't scripted. It wasn't formal. It wasn't meant for the public. And that's what made it all the more powerful. For decades, the narrative has centered on Charles and Camilla's enduring love against all odds. But this moment cracked that story wide open. The public reaction was immediate and emotional. Social media exploded with clips of Diana, tributes, and debates over whether the monarchy had ever truly recovered from her loss. A top royal correspondent tweeted, "This changes everything. If Diana was his true love, what was Camilla all along?" Suddenly, 25 years after Diana's tragic death, her legacy was back at the center of the British monarchy, reigniting old wounds and resurfacing painful truths that had never been fully addressed. This wasn't just about one sentence. It was the culmination of a story that began long before Diana, before Camilla, before the world even cared who Charles loved. To understand his haunting confession, we have to rewind. Back to the quiet heartbreak of a young prince still learning what it meant to live for duty. Before Diana, the woman who first stole Charles's heart. Before there was Diana or Camilla, there was Lady Amanda Knatchbull, a name few remember today, but one that once carried the weight of possibility. Charles met her during his early 20s, under the approving eye of Lord Mountbatten, who hoped she'd be the one to secure the line. Their relationship was private, intellectual, and free of paparazzi lenses. They shared books, letters, and a genuine bond. For a moment, it seemed like this quiet aristocrat might one day be queen. But the pressures of monarchy loomed larger than affection. Amanda turned down his proposal in 1977, stunned by the idea of stepping into the royal cage. Charles, devastated but bound to the logic of lineage, moved on. Yet insiders say he never truly forgot her. This early rejection hardened his resolve to marry appropriately next time. From that point on, emotion would take a back seat to expectation. The tragedy? Charles wasn't cold. He was constrained. The weight of the crown loomed over every decision. His family expected a virgin bride. The press demanded spectacle. And the institution required a symbol, not a soulmate. Amanda was his first quiet heartbreak. But it was only the beginning of a lifetime defined by lost chances and unresolved feelings. Just as Charles was trying to recover from his quiet rejection, fate intervened. A dinner, a moment, a young woman meant to be background suddenly stepped into the spotlight. It wasn't supposed to be Diana, but that's how destiny works. What followed would change the monarchy and his heart forever. Meeting Diana. Fate or mistake? Charles was originally dating Sarah Spencer, Diana's older sister. It was at a country weekend in 1977 that he first met Diana, then just 16 years old. Bright-eyed, awkward, and shy, she barely registered as a romantic interest. But years later, in the aftermath of Mountbatten's assassination, Charles reconnected with her. Diana, by then 18, offered comfort, sympathy, and something else. She looked up to him with starry-eyed admiration he hadn't felt in years. For Charles, grieving and lonely, Diana represented light and innocence. For the royal family, she was the ideal. Aristocratic, beautiful, virginal, and crucially, compliant. She ticked every institutional box. But was it love? Or was it a convenient fit wrapped in romantic fantasy? Charles was nearing 30, the age where heirs stop choosing and start conforming. Their courtship was brief, media-hyped, and filled with unspoken hesitations. In hindsight, it was a match made in misunderstanding. Diana thought she was marrying a romantic prince. Charles thought he was making the safest choice. Neither realized the emotional fault lines that would soon erupt. That early meeting, so casual, so coincidental, would go on to reshape the destiny of the British royal family, for better and for worse. With growing public attention and mounting royal pressure, Charles did what many expected, but few believed was heartfelt. He proposed. Diana said yes. The stage was set for a royal fairy tale, but behind the tiaras and television lights, something was already cracking, and the first sign was a single sentence. A fairy tale or a warning sign? When a reporter asked Charles if he was in love after the engagement announcement, his answer sent a chill through the room. Whatever in love means. The words echoed across Britain. Some laughed it off. Others were disturbed. But Diana? She was quietly devastated. Even then, she knew something wasn't quite right. The lead-up to the wedding was riddled with red flags. Diana found a bracelet Charles had custom-made for Camilla, engraved with the initials F and G, Fred and Gladys, their private nicknames. She confronted him. He didn't deny it. Palace aides urged her to stay quiet, push through, and focus on the bigger picture. The crown needed a princess. The ceremony was coming. Backing out wasn't an option. And so on July 29, 1981, with the eyes of the world upon her, Diana walked down the aisle. She smiled. She waved. She became a symbol. But she was already heartbroken. That single interview quote, dismissed at the time, now reads like a warning shot across a doomed romance. One rooted not in love, but in duty and denial. Despite the cracks, the world tuned in. Nearly 1 billion people watched the wedding, an event wrapped in fantasy. But the royal illusion came at a cost. Behind the scenes, Charles and Diana were already drifting. The cameras couldn't see it yet, but inside the palace, the distance had begun. The most watched wedding in history. July 1981, 750 million people tuned in. From Tokyo to Toronto, the world was glued to the TV. Diana in her ivory silk gown, Charles in naval dress, a spectacle that looked like love. But even at the altar, things went wrong. Diana mixed up Charles's names. Charles forgot to kiss her. The mistakes were shrugged off as nerves, but they were symbolic. Even in the fairy tale's first act, reality kept creeping in. Diana was already unsure. Charles was already guarded. The couple barely knew each other, just 13 meetings before the proposal. The wedding wasn't a celebration of love. It was a public event, staged by a 1,000-year-old institution desperate for relevance. Still, the show went on. The public cheered. Headlines declared a new golden age for the monarchy. But inside Buckingham Palace, two strangers were about to begin a life of intense scrutiny, incompatible expectations, and rapidly unraveling intimacy. The wedding was not a beginning. It was the start of the end. For a brief moment, the arrival of their sons seemed to mend the cracks. Royal joy swept the nation. But behind palace walls, the distance only grew. What began as tension turned into emotional isolation, and eventually, betrayal. Parenthood didn't heal their wounds. In fact, it only exposed the fault lines further. The heirs arrive, joy and growing distance. In June 1982, Diana gave birth to Prince William. 2 years later came Prince Harry. For a nation, it was a royal triumph, the heir and the spare, fulfilling the royal line of succession. But for Charles and Diana, parenthood brought both purpose and pain. Diana threw herself into motherhood. She was hands-on, affectionate, and fiercely protective. Charles, raised in a colder era of royal parenting, often appeared distant, even indifferent. According to multiple biographies, Charles was visibly disappointed when Harry was born. He had hoped for a girl. Diana later recalled that moment with bitterness, suggesting it was one of the first signs that Charles had emotionally checked out. But it wasn't just about gender. It was about legacy. Charles seemed increasingly preoccupied with Camilla, whose presence had never truly disappeared. Despite marrying Diana, his heart and attention were elsewhere. During both of Diana's pregnancies, Charles reportedly rekindled his relationship with Camilla in secret. Diana found out. Friends say she was devastated. "I felt like nothing more than a broodmare," she allegedly confided to one confidant. As Charles drifted back toward Camilla, Diana's loneliness turned into public melancholy. She was admired by millions, but felt utterly abandoned by the one person she needed most. The emotional distance became confrontation. Diana, once demure and soft-spoken, found her voice and began to use it. What started as heartbreak turned into rebellion. She was no longer content to stay silent, and when she confronted Camilla face to face, she shattered a royal taboo no one dared speak aloud before. Diana's breaking point and public courage. It was a 40th birthday party for Camilla's sister in 1989. Diana wasn't supposed to be there, but she showed up, walked straight up to Camilla, and delivered the line that echoed through history. "I know what's going on between you and Charles, and I just want you to know that." Camilla, caught off guard, reportedly replied, "You have everything. What more could you want?" Diana's response, "I want my husband." That moment, unfiltered, unsanctioned, marked a turning point. Diana was done pretending. No longer the shy young girl in the background, she began taking control of her narrative. She spoke about her depression, her eating disorder, and her emotional neglect. Most explosively, she gave the now infamous 1995 BBC Panorama interview. With piercing clarity, she delivered the line that would forever define her marriage. "There were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded." Millions watched. The palace was stunned. The Queen was reportedly furious. Charles's team scrambled for damage control, but the truth was out. Diana had spoken her truth, and the public embraced her for it. She wasn't just a princess anymore. She had become a symbol of vulnerability, courage, and rebellion against an unfeeling institution. The monarchy had no script for this. Diana had gone rogue, and the people loved her for it. After Diana's bombshell interview, the illusion was shattered. There was no repairing the marriage, and no hiding the dysfunction. The Queen herself finally stepped in. What followed wasn't just a legal separation, it was a royal earthquake. The divorce wasn't just personal, it was a symbolic blow to the image of the monarchy itself. The shocking divorce. By December 1992, the separation was officially announced. It wasn't until 1996, 4 years of tension, tabloid chaos, and personal pain, that the divorce was finalized. The terms were brutal. Diana lost her title of Her Royal Highness, a symbolic demotion orchestrated by palace advisors. She retained her apartment at Kensington Palace and shared custody of William and Harry. but she was no longer formally royal. And yet, she remained the people's princess. Financial negotiations were tense. Diana reportedly received a lump sum of £17 million, massive in public perception, but modest compared to the crown's vast assets. More painful than the money was the dignity. Diana had wanted a seat at the table even after divorce. She wanted influence. Instead, she got silence. Charles, meanwhile, began gradually integrating Camilla into his public life, sparking controversy with every move. But Diana wasn't done. She launched a new era, one defined by independence, philanthropy, and global adoration. She embraced her role as a humanitarian, not a royal. Landmine campaigns, AIDS activism, visits to war zones. Diana was building a new legacy. The palace wanted her forgotten. The people made sure she never would be. From Palace to Paris, 50 words. Post-divorce, Diana seemed free, but peace would prove elusive. New love, paparazzi pressure, and public obsession all collided in one final, fateful summer. She was no longer bound by palace rules, but the spotlight had never been hotter, and it would follow her all the way to the Pont de l'Alma tunnel. Diana's new life and final summer. After her divorce, Diana found companionship with Dr. Hasnat Khan, a reserved heart surgeon she once described as her Mr. Wonderful. But the pressures of fame, security, and cultural expectations strained their relationship. When it ended, Diana was heartbroken once again. Enter Dodi Fayed, son of billionaire Mohammed Al Fayed. Charming, extravagant, and carefree, Dodi swept Diana into a whirlwind romance in the summer of 1997. Together, they sailed the Mediterranean on a private yacht, smiling under the sun while paparazzi chased them from every port. The world was obsessed. Tabloids screamed rumors of engagement, pregnancy, and revenge against the royal family. Diana was being watched, relentlessly. Every move she made was photographed, analyzed, monetized. She had escaped the palace, but not the price of fame. Then came Paris, August 31st, 1997. Fleeing a swarm of photographers, Diana and Dodi entered the Pont de l'Alma tunnel. Moments later, their car crashed. Dodi died instantly. Diana was critically injured and pronounced dead hours later. The world stopped. In one violent, senseless moment, the most beloved woman in the world was gone. And the public grief was matched only by fury, because many believed her death was not just an accident. It was the inevitable result of a system that refused to leave her alone. As the nation wept, the palace stayed silent. For days, there was no flag at half-mast, no statement, no public appearance. The people demanded answers. The monarchy, it seemed, had no playbook for this level of public grief. But when Charles appeared, something unexpected happened, a subtle act of defiance. National grief and royal silence. In the days following Diana's death, Britain entered an emotional state unlike anything seen before. Thousands flooded the gates of Kensington Palace, laying flowers, weeping openly, and demanding acknowledgement from the royal family. But Buckingham Palace remained quiet. No public address, no flag at half-staff. The silence was deafening. It wasn't just personal loss anymore. It felt like abandonment. Public outrage grew. Tabloids ran headlines like, "Where is the Queen?" and "Show us you care." Prime Minister Tony Blair, sensing the fury in the air, gave a speech that coined a now iconic phrase. She was the people's princess. It was a clear message to the crown. Diana didn't belong to them anymore. She belonged to everyone else. Then came the funeral. Charles insisted on flying to Paris to escort Diana's body home, against royal advice. At the funeral, He wore a navy suit instead of traditional mourning black. It was a quiet tribute, an echo of the navy outfit Diana had once said she loved. Whether it was rebellion or remorse, one thing was clear. Charles wasn't just burying his ex-wife. He was burying a part of himself, the part that had once hoped things could have been different. After Diana's death, Charles began the long journey of reshaping public perception and reclaiming a life with Camilla. But the road to acceptance would be long and bumpy, because no matter how carefully the palace rewrote the story, the world still remembered Diana. And forgiveness, as Charles would learn, is never guaranteed. The world mourned Diana, but the monarchy had to move forward. Slowly, methodically, Charles began reshaping his public image. And standing quietly in the background, as she always had, was Camilla, the woman many blamed, the woman Charles never let go of. Their love story was far from over, but acceptance came at a cost. Camilla's long road to acceptance. For years after Diana's death, Camilla Parker Bowles was seen as the villain, the third person who had destroyed a fairy tale. The public wanted nothing to do with her. She was barred from royal events, hidden from cameras, and treated by palace PR teams as a liability, not a future consort. But behind closed doors, Charles never wavered. He loved Camilla, always had, and he was determined to bring her back into the fold. The path to public forgiveness was slow and deliberate. In 1999, Charles and Camilla were photographed leaving the Ritz together, a carefully orchestrated, soft launch. Over time, she began attending charity events, family functions, and eventually, royal ceremonies. The Queen remained cold for years, refusing to even acknowledge Camilla in public. But in 2005, after decades of scandal and secrecy, Charles and Camilla finally married in a small civil ceremony. Queen Elizabeth did not attend the wedding, but she did host a reception afterward. It was a signal. The war was over. Camilla was never crowned Princess of Wales. That title, spiritually and emotionally, would always belong to Diana. Instead, she became Duchess of Cornwall, a quieter role, out of the spotlight. Even after being declared Queen Consort in 2022, Camilla maintained a private residence, preferring solitude over spectacle. She never sought the crown. She simply wanted Charles. And after all the years, all the pain, she finally had him. But the shadow of Diana never left the room. Camilla had the crown. Charles had the throne. And yet, something still lingered beneath the surface. Because as Charles aged, his public speeches changed. His tone softened. And then came the words that shattered the polished image of royal resolve. A simple confession, unscripted, and deeply, heartbreakingly human. Charles at 76, a man of reflection. As king, Charles's reign began late in life. At 73, he was the oldest monarch to ever ascend the British throne. With that came not just power, but reflection. He spoke more often of the past, of missed moments, of wounds never fully healed. And then, in a private conversation overheard by aides, came the words that shook the monarchy. Diana was the love of my life. It wasn't a formal interview. It wasn't for publicity. It was a quiet moment, shared over tea, reportedly after looking through a box of old letters and photos. But once leaked, it couldn't be contained. Newspapers ran it as front-page news. Social media lit up. Royal spokespeople refused to comment. But behind the palace gates, insiders say Camilla was stunned and not entirely surprised. She's always known, one former staffer confided, but hearing it out loud, that's different. The confession wasn't about rekindling old flames, it was about regret, about acknowledging that even kings live with what-ifs. Those close to Charles say he's haunted by how it all unfolded, that he loved Camilla deeply, but that Diana represented something else entirely. A possibility, a path not taken, a tragic loss that no crown could ever outweigh. It wasn't a betrayal. It was an admission from a man no longer hiding behind duty. With that single statement, Charles reopened a decades-old wound, not for scandal, but for truth. Because at the end of it all, this isn't just a story about crowns and castles. It's about love, loss, and the weight of a life lived for others. And it all leads to one final, aching question. Was it always Diana? As the dust settles on Charles's confession, the world is left to wonder. Was Camilla his partner, but Diana his heart? Can both be true? Or does one love always eclipse the other? Some royal commentators say Charles's admission was a mistake, that it undermines everything he built with Camilla. But others believe it was the most honest moment of his entire life. The idea that Diana was his true love reframes everything. The arranged courtship, the cold wedding, the infidelities, the divorce, even the way he mourned her. For years, Charles was cast as the villain. But now, perhaps, he's something else. A man caught between two women, two worlds, two kinds of love. Camilla offered comfort, longevity, and loyalty. But Diana? Diana was lightning, fire, the one that got away. And for Charles, that may be the love that leaves the deepest mark. Ultimately, it's not for us to judge. It's for history, for William and Harry, for the public that watched this saga unfold over 5 decades. But one thing is certain. Charles's reign will always carry the echo of a woman buried beneath a sea of flowers, loved by millions, and, at last, acknowledged by the man who couldn't say it until it was too late.